Welcome back to the deep dive, where we take complex source material and give you the essential context, the surprising facts, and the real underlying insights.
Today, we're wrestling with something that I think a lot of people have experienced firsthand.
Oh, absolutely. It's one of the most stubborn paradoxes in the modern corporate world, the Organizational Transformation Initiative.
You know the drill, right? Millions are spent, consultants are brought in, you get these glossy reports.
And yet, somehow, all the good ideas, the passion from employees, and maybe most importantly, trust, just seem to wither and die.
They get crushed by this invisible but completely overwhelming bureaucratic inertia. It is, I think, the ultimate organizational frustration, and it's chronic.
It really is.
We see organizations launch these massive, incredibly rigid, linear projects. Sometimes they span 3, 4, even 5 years, all aimed at achieving this holy grail of agility.
The irony is just, it's overwhelming. The way they try to become agile is by using the most rigid, non-agile process imaginable.
Exactly. The fundamental irony is that the very structure they use for the transformation mirrors the exact systems they're trying to overhaul. They treat the organization like it's a machine, a disconnected machine that just needs a few targeted fixes.
A new org chart here, a new piece of software there.
Right. And they believe the culture and the adaptability will just magically follow along.
And that approach, it fails almost universally. Our source material today, which is the phenomenal book, The Octopus Organization, A Guide to Thriving in a World of Continuous Transformation by Phil LeBrun and Jana Werner, it zeroes in on exactly this failure.
And they give us this brilliant, just necessary metaphor.
The Tin Man.
Yeah.
The inflexible, linear, top-down organization is the Tin Man. It's just waiting for oil, It can only move when it's explicitly instructed and lubricated.
And the alternative is the Octopus Organization. It's fluid, it's adaptive, it's completely customer-focused. It's capable of this continuous, simultaneous, and often invisible adaptation across multiple dimensions at once.
That framework is so critical because the cost of staying a Tin Man, it goes so far beyond just the money wasted that you see on a quarterly report.
That's just the visible tip of the iceberg, isn't it? The greater and often invisible cost is years of squandered market opportunities, the deep erosion of employee trust and belief.
And maybe the most devastating part, the quiet, steady departure of your most innovative and passionate talent.
Yes. These are the people who just get tired of watching their best ideas get stuck or actively killed in a swamp of complexity and process. The organization's passion it drains away into the bureaucracy.
So our mission for you, the listener, is pretty comprehensive today. We're going to unpack the most damaging organizational anti-patterns. Those are the toxic behaviors that kind of masquerade as progress but are actually stifling change.
And then we'll analyze the practical operational levers, the actual actions that help you foster genuine, continuous adaptability.
We're grounding all of this in the book's 3 foundational pillars that define a successful octopus organization: clarity, ownership, and curiosity.
And it's crucial to understand how they work together. These 3 pillars, they don't exist in a vacuum. They form a self-reinforcing, virtuous cycle.
Right. So clarity gives you the common context so everyone understands the problem and why it needs solving.
And that clarity enables the psychological safety you need for ownership, empowering people to actually make decisions.
That agency, in turn, ignites curiosity, which lets people experiment, try new things, learn from their mistakes quickly.
And then finally, that learning swings right back around to increase the organizational clarity. It refines the mental model, reinforces the whole cycle, and allows the organization to adapt continuously without having to launch a massive new transformation program every 2 years.
Okay, let's unpack that first major impediment, the clarity crisis. This starts with what seems like a simple problem, but it's maybe the most insidious one in modern business communication.
We're talking about talking without actually saying anything meaningful.
The pitfalls of corporate jargon and vague language, the language of avoidance.
The authors label this the corporate's problem, and it really is the sound of the Tin Man organization protecting itself.
What do you mean by that, protecting itself?
Well, it's when leaders use language that sounds impressive and strategic. It's often designed to conform to an expected executive dialect,
Right.
But it's so vague that it masks a lack of genuine intent or a fear of being direct or sometimes just pure intellectual laziness. They're trying to blend in or hide, not really lead or connect with the reality of the work.
And the examples are instantly recognizable. We've all sat in that meeting and heard something like, By leveraging cutting-edge AI-driven solutions and fostering a culture of agile innovation, we're pivoting toward a data-centric
So
ecosystem
this keeps going, right?
that will revolutionize our customer engagement strategies and propel us to the forefront of industry leadership for our stakeholders.
It sounds important. It really does. But if you actually try to distill that down, there's no actionable substance. It's a series of impressive nouns and verbs that are totally disconnected from any measurable outcome. And this is what creates that dreaded nodding heads, blank stares phenomenon in big meetings.
Everyone's nodding along because they don't want to look like they're the one who doesn't get it.
Exactly. But internally, they're cynical, they're bewildered, or they're just interpreting the message in 10 different ways.
That lack of genuine engagement is just, it's so corrosive. Professor Scott Galloway has a great term for this. He calls it yoga babble.
Yoga babble, I like that.
And he argues it's often used to mask intellectual insecurity or just to conform to that expected corporate performance. And the real danger here is that this generic, jargony language terms like fusion teams or data-enabled, it becomes infinitely interpretable.
Right. If you stop 5 different people in the hallway and ask them what data-enabled means for their day-to-day job,
You will absolutely get at least 3 contradictory answers.
and that ambiguity isn't a victimless crime. It creates real, measurable operational overhead. Teams start working at cross purposes, confusion takes over, efforts get duplicated, all because the initial idea wasn't clear enough to actually guide action.
Jargon also, and I think this often deliberate, it creates cliques.
Yes, it draws a clear boundary between us who get the strategy and them who don't. It reinforces the very silos the organization says it wants to get rid of.
And then you have these vague aspirational terms like Vision 2030 or Org of the Future. They stir the imagination, but they say nothing specific about the concrete intentions or the, frankly, painful behavioral changes required to deliver real value.
And that lack of specificity just neatly diffuses accountability across the whole organization. Nobody's really responsible.
And it's not just the goals, it's the specific words. The authors point out that certain verbs like cascade and rollout, they inherently reflect rigid top-down instructions.
They do. They suggest that employees are just recipients of marching orders, passive cogs in the machine, not active participants and owners of the change.
Which instantly undermines the possibility of achieving true ownership, the second pillar.
So the solution here has to be a cultural shift. Clarity isn't something you just deliver in an email. It must be co-created.
What does that look like in practice? Co-creating clarity.
It means leaders have to host repeated communications and, more importantly, create opportunities for people to really wrestle with complex ideas. They need to debate them until they internalize a shared understanding of the markets, customer needs, and tech shifts. That's how you build common mental models.
The Formula One pit team analogy they use is perfect for this. It just perfectly illustrates the power of these shared models.
It's a great one.
When you have that common context, the goal, the sequence, the risks, it enables this high-speed, synchronized decision-making with almost no need for communication.
The pit crew doesn't need a 30-page memo or 5 approval layers to change a tire, right?
Oh.
Their actions are this finely choreographed dance because every single person shares a clear, internalized common context.
If you want that speed and quality in your organization, you have to build that shared mental model first.
And to make this operational, they offer some really practical tools. One of the simplest is the Clarity Checklist.
A checklist.
Yeah. Before you communicate a strategy or a policy, you review it using protocols like the ones the World Health Organization developed for critical health information. The questions are deceptively simple. Could this be shorter? Does this rely on specialized knowledge?
Would my team, or a totally different department, clearly understand their role based on this message? I love the rigor of that.
My personal favorite lever, though, is the toddler test.
The toddler test, okay.
It's a mental exercise. If you cannot explain your complex idea, say your new business process or a strategic pivot, to a curious young person without immediately using jargon, then the idea hasn't been profoundly distilled yet.
It forces you to get to the absolute essence, the true core value, and eliminate all the corporate fluff.
And to break that jargon habit, you should turn it into a shared, maybe even slightly humorous, cultural exercise. They suggest hunting corporates.
Like a game.
Exactly. Build a living list of jargon and challenge teams to replace those terms with everyday language. You could gamify it with bullshit bingo, or have a non-word of the week where every use of the forbidden term triggers a small donation to charity.
That makes people hyper-conscious of their language, which is the whole point.
But the ultimate anchor for all of this has to be grounding in reality. You have to refuse to launch any new initiative until its impact is articulated in simple, tangible terms. It has to connect to a concrete customer or business outcome.
So instead of that example we used earlier, the leveraging AI for enhanced ecosystem optimization.
Right. The clarity lever forces that statement to be. We will use AI to reduce customer support wait times by 20% by the end of Q4. That shift forces substance over spin.
And it lets teams measure their success based on tangible value, not just on whether they followed a process.
Moving beyond just the day-to-day language. Clarity also fails when the organization's grand strategic purpose is, well, empty.
These generic purpose statements, they're often crafted to appeal to everyone and offend no one, which leads to what the academic Ranjay Gulati calls convenient purpose.
They become these vacuous, performative marketing slogans that employees either ignore or, more likely, actively mock.
We're talking about those superficial statements like advancing what matters or tomorrow starts today.
Exactly. They sound nice, but they offer zero guidance when you're facing a difficult, resource-constrained decision in the real world. In the absence of a clear lived purpose, the Tin Man organization just defaults to control structures, planning cycles, rigid budgets, extrinsic motivators.
Because it failed to inspire intrinsic motivation.
Precisely. The book has a great story from Netflix. CEO Reed Hastings found that a manager had made what was, objectively, an awful decision. But when he dug into it, Hastings realized the manager's choice was perfectly logical, given the limited, siloed information he had at the time.
So the root cause wasn't incompetence.
It was a profound lack of clarity about the overarching business purpose and context. He should have been guided to prioritize long-term value over short-term gain, but the system didn't give him that context.
That is such a crucial point. The failure wasn't just poor communication, it was a failure of governance. The system implicitly rewarded that manager for optimizing locally.
It showed him that the organization's true values were completely disconnected from the mission statement hanging in the lobby.
So true clarity isn't in the slogans, it's in what employees experience. It's in the last difficult decision a leader made, the projects that got funded, and who got promoted.
If your stated clarity contradicts those lived realities, the slogans are actually worse than worthless, because they just breed cynicism.
So how do you fix this? The book says you have to turn purpose into a working tool.
The first lever is to make the purpose statement the tiebreaker. When you face two equally valid but conflicting options, you use the purpose statement to make the choice, and then you talk openly and repeatedly about how it guided that choice.
You weave it into the fabric of daily decision-making.
Another tactic is, if the words purpose or mission have become jargon themselves, just change the language.
What would you change it to?
Switch to a pride or ambition statement. Ask the team, what makes us proud to work here? Or what's the audacious goal we're trying to achieve? It connects emotionally and sidesteps the tired corporate language.
But the most profound lever, the one that really defines the octopus, is the commitment to a continuous strategy debate.
Successful octopus organizations are always vigorously debating the conscious trade-offs they have to make. They show courage in pruning markets or initiatives they explicitly won't pursue.
Because strategy isn't just what you do, it's what you choose not to do.
That debate has to center on these really challenging questions. Who are we here to serve, and who are we choosing not to serve? And what is the single biggest change we seek to make in our industry?
If you don't have the courage to define what you're not doing, then by default you're trying to do everything, and therefore you're doing everything poorly.
And that is the essence of a tin man spreading itself too thin.
Okay, so now we transition from the language failure to the operational failure. We're looking at how the traditional management machinery, which is supposed to ensure strategic intent, systematically becomes a trap that undermines everything.
And this starts with the relentless annual tin man goal machinery.
Right. The Tin Man Organization has this highly sophisticated, well-oiled process for goal setting. Annual budgets, quarterly reviews, cascading objectives.
Endless software tools to track it all. But what the authors point out is that this huge machine lacks the vital essence. Human judgment, strategic insight, market responsiveness, all that machinery just produces these oversimplified, abstracted, or frankly vacuous goals.
They lack the coherence needed to guide action.
And the pitfalls are just tragically repetitive. You see the classic ambiguous goals like improve customer satisfaction.
With no definition of magnitude or measurement.
Or you see cosmetic goals, these jargon-reliant responses to the latest trend, like a new focus on ESG reporting optimization, which just masks the absence of a real business problem.
But the most damaging, I think, are the incoherent or conflicting goals. The organization simultaneously aims for market leadership and aggressive cost cuts.
One department is told to increase quality, while another is told to increase delivery speed by 50% with fewer resources. It just pulls teams in opposite directions, guaranteeing internal conflict.
This substitution of real strategy with just aspirational goals leads to a very predictable and very damaging failure pattern.
It often starts with an ambitious leader, frequently an external recruit, being brought in with an impossible multi-year mandate.
And these outsiders, they really struggle. They often lack the internal tacit knowledge of how things really work here. The failure rate for them is staggering, isn't it?
Over 40% with an average tenure of only about 2.5 years.
And here's the insidious part. The existence of that singular external transformation leader subtly allows the rest of the C-suite to abdicate their own responsibility for the change.
They've outsourced it. They've outsourced the hard work, which means they never truly commit the necessary resources or face the necessary trade-offs.
A few years in, the goals are obviously unachievable, teams are fighting for resources, dates are treated as these immutable targets.
And the failure is inevitable. The ambitious leader quietly exits, the organization spends millions more on the next consultant, and the cycle just repeats. The opportunity cost is enormous.
Okay, so tied to goals, we have to talk about metrics. We all know Peter Drucker's axiom, what gets measured gets managed. It's a staple.
It is. But the book forces us to confront its costly inverse. What is not measured is not managed. And maybe worse, what you can measure, you often end up optimizing above all else. Igor Ansoff observed this years ago.
What was his observation?
That corporate managers start off trying to manage what they want, but they ultimately end up wanting only what they can easily measure.
And this creates dangerous, sometimes profoundly unethical outcomes.
The book gives this chilling, real-world example of the UK National Health Service. Under pressure to improve measurable waiting times, hospitals successfully reduced them.
What?
But the death rate following emergency heart attack admissions simultaneously and substantially increased. The focus was so intense on the measurable target, the waiting times, that mortality wasn't tracked as closely. Services affecting mortality were cut to optimize the metric.
Focusing on easy, quantifiable metrics can tragically override human judgment and the entire mission of the organization. Let's define the 4 types of problematic metrics the Tin Man gets obsessed with.
First up, vanity metrics. These look great on a dashboard, but provide little genuine insight.
2 million registered users, but only 300 are active, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Second, proxy metrics. These are indirect measures that we hope correlate with the desired outcome, like using the number of patent applications to measure innovation.
Or time spent on a website to measure engagement. But what if that high time on site just means your user interface is terrible and people can't find what they need?
The proxy is misleading you into complacency. Third, and maybe the most infamous, are perverse metrics, the classic Cobra effect.
Right, where the metric is technically correct, but it drives terrible behavior. The historical example is the British government offering a bounty for dead cobras in Delhi,
Which led people to start breeding cobras just to collect the rewards. When the program ended, they released the now useless snakes, and there were more cobras than when they started.
The metric succeeded, the original goal was destroyed.
And the fourth type is absolute target metrics. These create an endpoint that actively discourages continuous improvement.
If your SLA is 99.9% reliability, once you hit that, you often just coast until a problem emerges, rather than pushing for excellence.
This obsession is governed by 2 foundational laws. Campbell's law, which says metrics get manipulated when they become important targets, and Goodhart's law, which says when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure.
The most extreme public consequence of this was the 2017 United Airlines incident.
Absolutely. The aggressive efficiency targets mandated full capacity on flights led to the overbooking. And when Dr. David Dow refused to be bumped, his physical removal was a direct, horrifying result of the system prioritizing a quantifiable target over basic human judgment.
So we have to stop viewing metrics as tools of control and start seeing them as tools for discovery. How do we make them work for the octopus?
The first lever is to focus on learning. Use metrics for experimentation and generating hypotheses, not purely for judgment or punishment.
The second requires some courage from leadership.
It does. You have to have the guts to abolish metrics that fail the iterative 3-time so what test.
Yeah.
If you can't connect a metric to a meaningful outcome by the third so what, get rid of it. It's just clutter.
And the third lever is maybe the most important for ownership, co-create metrics.
Instead of imposing top-down quantitative metrics, involve the people accountable for the work in proposing their own. That process of co-creation brings immediate clarity, ownership, and intrinsic buy-in.
If I help define how my success is measured, I'm far more committed to achieving it.
And finally, organizations have to embrace qualitative data. Quantitative data gives you the what. Qualitative data gives you the why. You have to actively seek customer stories and internal observations to enrich the context and challenge your assumptions.
Metrics tell a story, but rarely the whole one.
Now we're moving from the failure of language and goals to the very structures and behaviors that actively prevent the octopus from forming. We're talking about silos, gatekeepers, and the process monsters.
And how leadership inadvertently reinforces all of these traps.
Functional silos are rarely dismantled by a new org chart. They're often reinforced and entrenched at the very top, at the leadership level.
Executives prioritize their own domain finance, HR, R&D, and their primary allegiance is drawn inward.
This deepens the fiefdoms, leading to internal battles and irreconcilable approaches, even when every executive claims they're serving the customer.
The functional conflicts become the norm. The book gives classic examples. Finance cuts costs aggressively, while operations simultaneously opens expensive new distribution centers.
Right. And marketing launches a new product line that requires massive R&D investment, while R&D is under a mandate to streamline their portfolio. There's no central, clear tiebreaker.
The structural conflict is then made worse, often unconsciously, by the leadership shadow.
The leaders' attitudes, their impatience, their dismissiveness, their avoidance of tough issues are instantly mirrored by their teams. It creates these unspoken cultural norms.
The story of the Fortune 100 CEO who snapped "You're in my chair" at a junior employee. That one quick territorial moment sends a signal to the whole organization that hierarchy is more important than collaboration.
Or the CHRO who took a 2-week vacation while her team executed massive, painful layoffs and then came back totally detached from the trauma. Her avoidance of the tough human element was mirrored.
Leaders have to understand that their behavior defines the culture, not the values poster on the wall.
So how do you tackle this? The levers focus on forced, shared accountability. One tactic is to hold silo-busting problem-solving sessions framed from an enterprise-wide customer perspective.
You force the finance leader and the marketing leader to sit down and solve a single shared customer-impacting problem together.
Another key lever is conducting blameless decision debriefs. The debrief centers not on finding fault, but on analyzing how the different functional perspectives contributed to the outcome, good or bad.
And critically, leaders must consistently model humility. This means using questions like, what blind spots do I have, and what am I missing right now?
And openly sharing their own past mistakes, rather than projecting this image of invulnerability. It's powerful for leaders to just get their hands dirty sometimes. As a learner, asking simple questions like, what's the most frustrating part of your daily task?
Okay, let's talk about the innovation killers that are baked into the Tin Man structure. Gatekeepers. The book describes how innovative proposals get stuck running the gauntlet of everyone who can say no.
It is the absolute death of flow and speed. They cite a real-world example of an insurance app feature that promised to cut claim processing time by 60%.
Sounds great.
But before release, it needed sequential sign-off from legal, marketing, UX, the CISO's office, and finally, the CEO's steering committee.
That sounds exhausting and slow.
It resulted in a minimum 12-week delay, time during which competitors launched similar features, each gatekeeper optimized for their own narrow domain. Legal mitigated risk, procurement cut costs, security ensured compliance.
And this structural design creates a massive, powerful bias toward inaction. It only takes one no to stall everything, but it requires a yes from every single gatekeeper to move ahead.
Gatekeepers are inherently incentivized to play it safe. If they approve an idea and it fails, they face consequences. If they say no and present potential failure, they're seen as responsible. The system erodes the time value of innovation.
The Octopus solution is to replace those gatekeepers with guardrails.
Right. Guardrails define the limits of acceptable action, allowing teams to proceed autonomously and quickly within those boundaries. The Ritz-Carlton is the classic example. Employees can spend up to $2,000 to resolve any guest problem without approval.
It's a move from control to trust. The levers here are about changing the role.
Transform gatekeepers into coaches and early-stage advisors. Instead of legal just reviewing completed work to find flaws, they hold weekly compliance clinics to guide teams proactively.
You can also institute peer consultation networks instead of mandatory approvals, allowing the core team to keep decision ownership.
This leads right into the problem of dependencies, which exponentially kill flow efficiency. The Tin Man organization prioritizes resource efficiency, keeping people busy, over flow efficiency, keeping the actual work moving.
And functional specialization hardwires these massive dependencies into every single process.
The math here is genuinely chilling. The authors show that if you have a single task with a high 90% chance of success, adding just 4 sequential dependencies immediately drops the overall success rate to only 66%.
And a project with 8 sequential dependencies
Has only one good outcome out of 256 theoretical possibilities. The probability of failure just skyrockets.
So the octopus has to systematically address these.
The levers are clear. Eliminate them, for example, with self-service portals. Automate them. Or weaken them. Amazon is a prime example of weakening dependencies by breaking large systems into small service teams that communicate via a common API.
And you have to manage them better by visualizing them, using dependency matrices to challenge your assumptions and find the bottlenecks.
The Tin Man's devotion to rigidity ultimately gives rise to the process monster. The problem isn't process itself, but excessive process adherence displacing actual problem solving.
It creates this illusion of productivity while stifling outcomes.
The 1999 KLM squirrel incident is a horrifying example. 440 live squirrels arrived at Amsterdam airport from China. Because the paperwork wasn't exactly correct, rigid adherence to customs process dictated.
Oh, no.
Disposal in an industrial poultry shredder. A bureaucrat refused to use common sense or ethical judgment because the process mandated inaction. Rigid process overrode humanity.
On a less dramatic but more persistent level, we see this every day as bureaucratic drag. An organization overreacts to one incident. Someone files a fraudulent $200 expense report, and now that report needs 10 approval levels.
It follows Parkinson's law. Bureaucracy expands regardless of the workload. Research suggests knowledge workers spend up to 41% of their daily time on non-value-add administrative work.
The antidote is replacing rigid prescriptive process with higher-order guidance, principles, tenets, and guidelines.
Right. Principles are ethical guardrails. Netflix's famous act in Netflix's best interest for travel eliminates the need for a huge policy. Tenets are trade-off statements. Amazon's "we optimize for speed" makes an explicit choice. And guidelines suggest how to do something, enabling ownership, whereas processes prescribe what to do.
It requires a shift in risk tolerance. The octopus accepts the occasional risk of poor judgment because preventing a few bad decisions isn't worth sacrificing thousands of better, faster, more adaptive decisions.
You can even calculate the Bureaucratic Mass Index, or BMI, to measure non-value-adding time and target a 10% annual reduction.
And we have to adopt minimum viable policies, start with minimalism, and critically institute expiration dates for non-critical internal processes. Make them earn their right to exist.
Finally, we have to address the perpetual struggle with centralization versus decentralization. The Tin Man endlessly swings this pendulum.
Centralizing for efficiency, then immediately decentralizing for agility, driven by the most recent pain point, not by strategic design. The constant reorging is the definition of anti-transformation.
The conflict often boils down to misaligned incentives. Central procurement optimizes for cost, but without considering the total cost of ownership or the impact on service quality for the local business unit.
The octopus rejects this false binary. It adopts an internal customer obsession mindset, where central teams exist solely to support their decentralized internal customers.
This creates a successful hub-and-spoke model. Centralized capabilities like platforms and standards, but highly decentralized execution. DBS Bank did this by shifting to two-in-a-box platforms with joint business and tech ownership and focusing on end-to-end customer journeys.
We've arrived at the last core pillar, curiosity, which is the absolute lifeblood of continuous adaptation.
Organizations that fail to cultivate this are structurally incapable of sustaining transformation because they just stop evolving their mental models.
It's staggering how our systems actively drain curiosity. As young children, we ask between 27 and 107 questions an hour. By the time we're in our careers, that plummets to maybe 3.
Why? Because the system subtly trains us to fear looking incompetent. It praises correct answers over insightful questions. Knowing the answer is safer than seeking a new one.
And this comes at an existential cost today. The useful lifespan of many technical skills has plummeted to as little as 18 months.
Yet too many Tin Man organizations still treat employee development as a discretionary cost to be cut, despite the rhetoric that people are our greatest asset. If we stop learning, we stop adapting.
The modern fear for any leadership team should be that not training your employees means they'll stay, but they'll remain functionally incompetent.
Astroteller, from Alphabet X's Moonshot Factory, has this fascinating concept he calls the 90% learning cost.
Okay, what's that?
He says if you asked his team to recreate all their intellectual property, they could probably do it in 10% of the original time. The other 90% of that initial investment wasn't spent building, it was spent on the critical learning that had to happen, figuring out what didn't work.
So those failed projects are like intellectual moonshot compost that new successful projects can grow from.
Precisely. So the lever here is a powerful cultural mandate. You must make learning the work. It can't be a separate HR function. Embed it directly into jobs.
Like dedicating a few days at the start of a project for the team to learn a new AI tool that's vital to the task.
Exactly. And guide them through Cole's experiential learning cycle. Experience, reflect, conceptualize, experiment. That ensures they're actually solidifying the learning.
But how do you ensure celebrating failure doesn't just encourage recklessness, especially in a public company? How do you explain a massive project failure to shareholders as just learning?
That's the key challenge, and it requires profound psychological safety. You have to systematically celebrate intelligent failure. And intelligent failure is one that results from a well-designed experiment based on a reasonable hypothesis that yielded valuable information. It's not just carelessness.
You frame them as learning opportunities by conducting blameless postmortems.
Right. Focusing on systems, not individual blame. Astroteller even encourages the idea of a failure resume, a public list of your most insightful failures to encourage appropriate risk-taking.
Another anti-pattern that kills adaptation is organizational distance from the customer, the proxies trap.
Where organizations replace direct engagement with abstract metrics like NPS or low-call volume, which might just mean customers gave up.
The Octopus imperative is direct, personal customer engagement. Leaders have to get out of the boardroom and into the field.
Phil LeBrun worked in McDonald's restaurants. Jana Werner listened to customer calls at Tesco Bank. These aren't just token visits. Microsoft famously transformed its Xbox strategy after home visits showed the console was a family entertainment hub, not just a gaming device for a teenager.
Data alone wouldn't have given them that insight.
This direct immersion fuels the working backward approach. Teams articulate customer value by writing an internal press release from the future, announcing the success of their product.
It forces them to answer those foundational questions before writing a single line of code. Who's the customer? What's the problem? What's the benefit?
If the press release isn't compelling, the project doesn't even start. This is the antithesis of innovation theater.
Innovation theater. That's where innovation is segregated into these labs that fail 90% of the time, or it focuses on flashy prototypes to impress executives.
It avoids the hard, messy work of customer understanding and integration. And it tells the rest of the organization that innovation is someone else's job, ensuring the Tin Man core remains untouched.
To combat this incrementalism, Octopus organizations have to think big. The book presents the 10x paradox.
Which is that achieving something 10 times bigger is often counterintuitively easier than a 10% incremental improvement.
Why is that?
Because a 10% goal keeps you shackled to your current constraints, your existing processes, your old mental models. It reinforces the Tin Man. A 10x goal, however, forces radical thinking. It frees you from current limitations.
You stop debating how to get from 12.1% to 12.6%, and you start debating what would it take to create a shopping experience with no checkout.
That ambition is what drives true adaptation. It's intrinsically linked to an infinite game strategy. The goal isn't to win, it's to keep playing.
Which makes continuous curiosity and ambitious exploration mandatory for long-term relevance.
For organizations ready to start this shift, it's helpful to think about Donella Meadows' levers for systemic change, which range from small adjustments to profound shifts in purpose and mindset.
And the critical starting point, which runs counter to the Tin Man's instinct, is not a giant multi-year transformation plan.
No. It's to start small by tackling one frustrating anti-pattern. Develop a focused hypothesis, run a small, contained experiment like deprecating a frustrating practice, and rigorously document the learning.
The scale has to be small enough that the potential downside feels manageable.
And that experiment has to engage in both single-loop and double-loop learning. Single-loop is analyzing the surface results.
Yeah.
What happened? Double-loop is the deeper reflection. Why did we have that frustrating process in the first place? What were our underlying assumptions?
You're learning about how you think, not just what you do.
Finally, the way change endures is by shifting from the Tin Man instinct to scaling mandating a solution, top down to the octopus focus on spreading.
Spreading is when successful ideas and practices flow organically from team to team based on need and context. It creates a pull dynamic.
The story of Steven Brozovich at Amazon is a perfect illustration. He was a web developer frustrated with an inefficient command line interface. On his own initiative, he built a visual image search program that solved his pain point.
It wasn't mandated or marketed.
It just spread organically because it solved a real annoying problem for his colleagues. It eventually became an international feature and earned him Amazon's Just Do It award. That pull model is how the octopus ensures lasting, bottom-up change.
What a phenomenal deep dive into the architecture of adaptability. I mean, the central message of shedding the Tin Man suit is really about shifting the organization's philosophy from control
Top-down processes, mandated goals, rigid hierarchy.
to providing essential context, shared clarity, empowered teams operating within guardrails, and decentralized ownership.
Absolutely. The antidote to all that bureaucratic rigidity is that self-reinforcing, virtuous cycle of clarity, ownership, and curiosity. You need profound clarity to empower ownership.
And that ownership, that freedom to act and experiment, is what ignites the curiosity and continuous learning you need to stay adaptive.
The ultimate goal, as the authors suggest, isn't to eliminate bureaucracy entirely. That's impossible. It's to ensure that the risk of the occasional poor judgment.
Which is the necessary cost of freedom.
Right. It's to ensure that that risk is profoundly worth the reward of thousands of better, faster, and more adaptive decisions that come from true ownership.
And the most difficult step is just recognizing the structural bias in your own organization, the specific Tin Man behaviors you tolerate every single day.
So if we leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over, if you had to audit your last 10 important organizational decisions, resource allocation, a product launch, a policy change, how many of those choices were truly influenced by a strong set of shared values and a clear, co-created purpose?
And how many were simply dictated by the constraints of an existing budget, an outdated policy, or a deeply entrenched approval process?
Ask yourself, which mechanism is truly running your organization right now?